1. I worked at a smallish McDonald's in and around 2005, which was situated in the parking lot of a big box store complex. I covered mainly lunch shifts during the summer before transitioning to night shifts after school started back up. I hated all the other part-timers because they were lazy butts, while the lunch crew were a bunch of retired old ladies who needed extra money for bridge gambling. But that's another story. It was a rainy Tuesday when a guy wearing a blue and red jacket stormed in and ordered 32 cheeseburgers. If you've ever worked in fast food, you know that the fryer, flat-top grill, is only so big. You can fry in your grill up to about 12 regular burger patties at once if you absolutely jam them all in there. But at the McDonald's I worked at, we segregated our fryers, so we had one dedicated to chicken and fish products, one dedicated to meats, and a third for the meat fryer, also called the flat-top grill, was dedicated to no salt and pepper. Normally burgers come with salt and pepper put on during the frying process, but some people who frequented our store were allergic, so we had a separate area for that. This meant we could only do 8 patties at a time. To further cause issues, the guy arrived in the middle of our dinner rush, so we already had orders frying up, and our stock of existing burgers was already out. I'm in the kitchen, and I immediately threw more burgers on the fryer, but after that, it was just a waiting game. I can hear this irate burger man ranting at the staff. Our manager would have beat his ass if she'd been there, but we only had a supervisor, and after the man made her cry, I, as the most experienced worker on shift, stepped in to keep things going. I went out front and told the man that we were making the burgers as fast as we could, but obviously there are limits he told us to fuck ourselves with. He then went on a rant about how he needs those burgers to feed his kids' soccer team, and they're waiting in the bus for their dinner. I indicated that we did do catering orders, but we have a phone number precisely for that. He continued to rant at me about how he needed his burgers now, and how we should have just already had 32 burgers already cooked and ready, because didn't we know that sometimes people just need 32 burgers and blah blah blah. So I went back and made his burgers, loaded them all up, and handed them over. He took the burgers and then fixed me with a smirk and went, "Where's my Philly cheesesteak?" This was at the time we had a deli counter, something that has long since been phased out. This ingrate did not order a Philly cheesesteak, and we both knew it, but he kept circling back to the customer is always right comment and demanded that he must get his cheesesteak that he didn't pay for. He threatened that he'd demand his money back if we didn't get him his cheesesteak. Alright, fine. I was the only one in the store who could make deli sandwiches. It was super simple. Everyone else was just inept or lazy or both. Normally, we take 2 buns, run them through the toaster, throw on lettuce, take a packet of pre-mixed Philly cheesesteak, put it in the microwave, nuke for 2 minutes, and drop it on top, sauce it, and go. This time I went through all the steps without nuking it, wrapped it up all nicely, and handed it off to the guy with a smile. I'd even heated the bun like normal, so it looked just like a regular Philly, but the meat and cheese were just an ice-cold brick. The guy headed off jauntily, got into his bus, and presumably distributed his cheeseburgers and drove off. I headed to the back to see how the supervisor was getting on. Better, but she wanted to go home for the night. Now, while I was senior in the sense that I took on a lot of responsibility and had experience with this kind of stuff, I was actually quite new to that store. I had just had a reputation for not taking shit and being responsible, so I wasn't actually authorized to close up the store. Still, I conferred with the other staff, who rang up the actual manager and got approval to close early. So we get everything ready and done, pack up, and begin closing up the front, and the bus and a very angry man in a red and blue jacket pull in. He practically leaps down from the bus and races across the parking lot towards our door, at which point I smile at him, lock the door, and turn the open sign off, then close the blinds, and we all filed out the back. He was still beating on the door as we got into our cars and left. 2. Here is my PettyRevenge story from the 80s. My parents moved pretty often around a very small part of a Midwestern state. so I went to many tiny schools that varied widely in how well they taught their students. In between my freshman and sophomore year, we moved to the largest town in our area. I went from being in a freshman class of just 25 students to a class of 300 students. It was a huge culture shock for me. None of the schools I had attended had any kind of drama club or classes. I had no frame of reference for any kind of theater-type stuff, or many things that happened in the much larger school system, really. So my English teacher was the drama class and club queen. Drama is her life. She works with the local colleges to produce plays and stages yearly plays at the high school. She does community theater with all the local students, and she has favorites. She is not shy about who she likes and who she hates. She would always fix the schedule so her favorite drama kids got her English class because she was so integral to their lives and crucial to their development, which I thought was extra weird. Drama club seemed a little culty. Also, sometimes she would expose a kid who had messed up in a play during class. She was a mean bully who played favorites. I did very well in my English classes with her, and was even bored somewhat by the curriculum. By about mid-year, this drama teacher pulled me aside and said I should have been in a tougher class. She said there were no spots in the high-track class, but that she would sit me in front of her desk. She would then teach me a little extra on the side so I wouldn't miss out. She said she would make sure I got into high-track in my junior year. I was pretty excited to be singled out in such a huge class. I was also excited at the idea of high-track for my next year. I really enjoyed English classes generally. Well, the extra work was totally bogus. She handed me the Scarlet Pimpernel and told me to write a report. The book was boring, and I wasn't getting extra credit for it. I didn't much like her as a teacher. I quit reading the extra work that was only for me to do in this class and just pretended like I hadn't agreed to it. She also quit talking about extra work, but she kept me front and center at her desk. I realized that next to me was her favorite student, the star of our little drama club, Nick. She had been coaching Nick since middle school, and she would often tell us Nick would one day win an Oscar. Nick would always reply that he would thank her in his acceptance speech from the podium. She would smile and pat him and praise him. They had little jokes between themselves that they would make mid-class. It was really weird. So I come back from Christmas break, and we're taking our first big test for the semester when it happens. Nick casually leans towards me and says sotto voce, "Hey, what's the answer to question 8? He's not speaking in a normal tone of voice, but he's not whispering. I'm sitting right in front of the teacher's desk. I could have reached out and touched it with a foot. I looked at Nick and then looked at the drama teacher. I waited and waited. She sat there as if she hadn't heard a thing. None of the students near us said anything either. Totally surreal. If I got caught cheating, I knew my mother would tear me up, but did it count as cheating if I just told this guy the answer? So I dusted off the Gen X motto and said, whatever. I gave him the answer and waited for her to send us to the office or do something. She just sat there so pleased with herself. I kept waiting for her to say something, and as the semester went on, Nick kept asking for the answers to more and more questions on tests. Now I'm reviewing what has happened in this class, and I'm realizing she figured out I was good in this class, and got me next to her future Oscar winner explicitly to help him cheat. As the semester goes on, I studied harder and went with the flow, but I was pretty mad. She has straight up used me because I was the new kid. I had a plan. A modest proposal, if you will. I started whispering the harder stuff to Nick so he wouldn't have to ask so much, and would even angle my paper so he could see it better. All semester long, I wanted him to not worry about a single answer on any test. I wanted his cheating experience to be smooth as silk, and she was thrilled that I figured out what she wanted. Then it was finals time. Even though we were just high school students, we were in a university town, so it was modeled on the university style. Final had a huge weight on our overall grade. I gave him entirely wrong answers, absurdly wrong answers in fact, while she sat right in front of me. I guess he had long ago stopped doing anything with the class material because he just wrote everything I said down. She was a good actor because she must have been screaming inside listening to me. She never flinched or even raised her eyes to me. She never indicated she knew what was happening. I enjoyed it so much. It felt so great. The most fun I've ever had taking a test. When the bell rang, she looked up and looked right at me. I just smiled right back at her. In the aftermath, I've always wondered what she did about his test. There is simply no way she flunked him. I'm positive he failed that test badly. She got me back, though. I was never allowed an AP English or high-track English my entire high school career. I was pissed, but it was worth it. Nick ended up going to New York because the stage called to him. He got on a few shows, but ended up nowhere. The best part, though, there was someone in that class who did make it pretty big in Hollywood. It wasn't Nick, and it wasn't me, just a quiet kid who sat in the back of the class the whole time. I don't know if I ever spoke to them the whole time we were in high school together. This kid was very introverted and not someone you'd think Hollywood. But every time I see this person getting Hollywood accolades, I toast to Nick, future Oscar winner, and the drama teacher who nearly coached someone who made it. That must have really burned her up. 3. There is this one Japanese food place not too far from me. I absolutely love it because there was a time when sushi gained massive popularity, and it seems sushi buffets were popping up like Starbucks. But this place wasn't strictly a sushi buffet. They had all sorts of Japanese dishes I couldn't find anywhere else, in addition to the best sushi around. Only place I'd been to where I've gotten Japanese food around the same level as the stuff I got in Japan. I don't have the time or money to go in as often as I'd like, but I guess I'm enough of a regular because the owner eventually began to recognize me at a glance. My second favorite dish there is the spicy tonkatsu ramen. Now to clarify, I've grown a solid taste for spicy food, but I'll also freely admit I'm not an absolute spicy veteran. Head of the curve, maybe. Survived the one dip challenge, took the end challenge without puking, etc. But not one of those guys chowing down on raw ghost peppers or ordering a dish with the sole purpose of being, I want to be in pain! So, I love this one spicy ramen dish, but after the second time I started thinking, I think it could actually stand to be a bit more spicy. Next time I order it, extra spicy. Bit of an extra kick, was absolutely amazing. So naturally, every other time I order it, extra spicy. So they complied. But it seems when I said extra spicy, they took that as I wanted spicier than last time. One day I get a bowl, and it clearly had a whole handful of Thai peppers stewing at the bottom of it. Gotta say, it was still delicious as hell, but holy crap, that thing was hot. Partway through eating it, I'm sweating and tearing up. Natural. A bit further into eating it, I get pins and needles all down my right arm. Had a genuine moment of panic, thinking it was a heart attack until I remembered it would be my left arm to go numb if that was the case. Took a breather, let my system calm down, finished the bowl. It was still delicious after all. Just obviously skipped the extra pile of Thai peppers staring at me from the bottom. Now, I don't know if this is exactly malicious compliance. Staff was always friendly. I never put forward a rude, it wasn't hot enough last time, I said make it spicier attitude. But it could just be they assumed I meant hotter than last time every time I said extra spicy, and acted accordingly. But considering they jumped from a bit extra spicy to here, have a whole handful of Thai peppers, it seems like maybe someone in the kitchen first mistakenly assumed I meant make it hotter than last time, and took it as an affront to his cooking. I still go there whenever I can, best food in this hemisphere of the planet in my opinion. I had a laugh with the owner once about the experience and clarified for the future that my extra spicy is just me commenting off the base, not challenging them to keep amping it up and up until the spice boils my circulatory system. 4. I've been tempted to write this story for a while, but was too afraid. But I figured if I'm brave enough to post unpopular opinions in fan subreddits, I can write a personal story. Plus I'm bored at work, so I need to keep busy. So let's go back to pre-COVID days of college. I was in graduate school and started my first semester as a teaching assistant in a theories class. Now, the major associated with this class is more art and creative oriented. They're the type of student base that couldn't care less about theories other than academic discourse. So traditionally, our department usually had very engaging instructors to help make the required class more palatable. Or at the very least, the class was easy enough to avoid being a weed-out class. Enter Mr. Anger. The short of it is that Mr. Anger was a PhD student who had a dislike for our undergrads. I understood that graduate and doctorate students treat undergrads like opportunistic raccoons, usually for good reason, but Mr. Anger took it to another level. He was outright antagonistic to a level of hostility I had never seen from an instructor. The first conversation I had with the guy involved him sitting me down.
The first thing you should know is to never trust these students. You do not want to be their friends, he said.
Now, I recognize the sentiment, but the tone was on the level of a character from a zombie apocalypse movie. The level of contempt in his voice was discomforting. Got to the first day of class. Mr. Anger had 2 students for me that I had to follow through the semester, and both reflect his sentiment towards his students. First, he wanted everyone assigned to seats in alphabetical order for a class of over 100 students, so on the first day we had to spend the first 30 minutes naming every person on the roster to get them seated. And then, he expected me to take attendance every class, putting the names to the alphabetical order we sat the students in. He gave me no ID pictures and simply expected me to just learn all the names. Now, it didn't occur to us to just map the seating chart, but in my defense, I was a TA for less than a week at this point and was relying on the wisdom of Mr. Anger early on. I also have an anxiety disorder, so my panicked ass wasn't going to think up a quick solution. I still wonder why Mr. Anger, who has taught for a number of semesters at this point, didn't provide me with that idea, since it seems so obvious in retrospect. The second thing he wanted me to do was monitor the class in the back to make sure students weren't using their phones, give them a 0 on their participation grade if they were, so I had to know which students were not participating without a seating chart or not immediately knowing their name. This showcased his deep lack of trust of his students. He wanted little room for the students to cheat the system, which is hard to do with 120-odd students and a TA with no experience. Suffice to say, it was a shit show. My accuracy was horrible, and sitting through every class to monitor was terrible. Remember when I said that the theories instructor was usually engaging to make the clinical material more tolerable? Yeah, Mr. Anger wasn't that. To put it simply, if I had him as a teacher when I was an undergrad, I would have to consider him the worst instructor I ever had. He was vague, didn't compel discussion, and generally felt more like an obstacle to the students' learning than a guide. He was so bad that when another PhD student subbed for him, and actually taught the class, you can feel the atmosphere of the room change. You would never have thought a Nigerian man could take a theories lesson and turn it into paradise. But it sure felt like it for the students and I. So, about a few weeks in, and I threw my hands up and just did the old sign-up sheet method. This lasted for most of the semester until the last month, where Mr. Anger sent a critical email telling me to revert back to the old method. When I told him my concerns, as well-mannered as I could, he accused me of being hostile and other inflaming adjectives. I suppose he wanted to seem I was the agitator for email evidence. He also threatened my TA evaluation, which I didn't take too well, which leads to the main event. Part of the class was an essay, and in the fine print of the assignment laid one sentence: "This assignment can be worked with another person." The vagueness and lack of limitations could easily cause confusion, even be exploited in the right hands. When I showed him my concern for this part of the assignment, he waved it off and said this wouldn't be a problem. This sort of put me over the edge. I'm not quick to anger, but that was close to what pulling the final straw felt like. Got to class, and he is explaining the assignment. I know the moment a student asks about the group project line, it would easily cause a ruckus. But no one was saying anything, so I took matters into my own hands. I got the attention of a student sitting next to me. "Hey, look at page 3, I whispered. He turned to the page in question right before I stabbed his paper with my finger. "Can you ask Mr. A about this line?" Naturally, he was confused. I mean, why the hell would the TA be asking him to do such an odd thing? But I reassured him and told him to humor me. A few minutes later, he raised his hand and asked the question. What followed was the most insane, chaotic, and out-of-control college class I've ever seen. It was like a high school auditorium. People were talking over each other and asking questions. Girls were already deciding who to work with. People were just on their phones and couldn't care less. This was over an hour-long class, and about 50 minutes of it dedicated to clearing up the confusion to this one fucking line. The assignment can be worked with another person. Mr. Anger looked overwhelmed as he tried to regain control of his class while I stared at him like Griffith from Berserk. It was my most satisfying moment as a TA. There is more to this story, but I will stop here since that is where the pettiness ends. I have matured. I look back and wish I'd done things differently. I realize now I made mistakes and learned lessons during that time. I totally understand if this story rubs you the wrong way. I sometimes feel the same way. That being said, while I don't remember the names of any of my 120-odd students, I still remember Mr. Anger's face trying to tame them. Five. This happened to my partner and I a couple of years ago. We live in the UK, and in 2019 I got a really good job in a new city in the Midlands. After a few months of commuting, we decided to move closer, as my partner could find a job easily. We booked several viewings with prices ranging from £600 to £1,200 per month. After serious consideration, we decided that the long-term goal was to buy a property, so we decided to go with the cheapest place in order to save money for the deposit faster. Now, this house was in one of the roughest neighborhoods I've ever lived in. The streets were covered in rubbish, people would be shouting outside in the middle of the night, people would be constantly passing by. You'd find needles in the park nearby and drunken drugged people laying around all the time. As per the house, it was a wreck, but we knew what we were getting into, just looking at the big picture of getting our own home. We agreed to move and pay the £600 deposit plus month's rent in advance. Landlord requests to keep his mail. Didn't sign a contract. I know, but we were young and naive. Payment to be done in cash. Do not change the prepaid electricity meter, etc. But he said there's no need to register for council tax because he'd cover it. In the UK, council tax is usually well over £100 per month, and it's normally the tenant who pays for it. This will be very important later. Moving day comes and the house is a mess, like a proper mess. The converted lot is full of rubbish. They left a bed behind when we moved in. There was years of Q-tips, rubbish, even underwear from the previous tenant. There was a thick layer of grease throughout the kitchen. I guess you get the picture. We took pictures, but later lost them when I changed phone and didn't do transfer of files. Another important detail is that in the year we lived there, the landlord went on holiday to Sri Lanka, Dubai, Australia, and somewhere else I cannot remember. Also, I drove a very expensive car. When he came to collect the rent, he'd make comments like, "Oh yeah, I had a barbecue in my new jacuzzi," etc. You'll know soon why this is important. Nearly 1 year passes, and we find a shared ownership in a new development in a better area, which together, with the amount of money we manage to save, we can afford. We get our mortgage and notify the landlord with 3 months' notice. I request to not pay the last month and he could just keep the deposit, but he refused. About 1 week before moving out, I accidentally opened a letter from the council in his name. Before noticing the name in the letter, I realize it's a council tax bill. But it's not hundreds, not even thousands of pounds per month. It's 40-something for the year. and noticed that the reason for this is that he'd been awarded housing benefits for living alone in my rented house and being in low pay. Moving day comes. Unlike how the house was upon moving in, we cleaned the property upside down just to be told by the landlord that he's keeping the deposit due to the carpet being dirty, etc. Now that did infuriate me, as I had lost the moving day pictures of the dirty house. I argued that the house was in a better state of maintenance than when we moved in, but to no avail. I need to mention that even losing the deposit, the money we saved in council tax still made it beneficial to us. But I'm a petty B-word, and I was very much done with landlord maliciousness. PettyRevenge. I called the city council and, with my most innocent voice, said that I'd been living in the property for a year and just seen a council tax bill filed with benefits for my landlord, and thought it was not okay. The previously monotonous voice of the person on the other end of the phone immediately lifted up in excitement and asked me more questions. They thanked me, and we hung up. That was everything until recently we saw our former neighbors. Apparently, landlord lost his benefits and was driving a much cheaper car. The house is currently for sale. I think the world is a bit better today. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Revenge is Ice Cream, episode 231. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Please boink the like button before you go. In these uncertain times, that little click is very helpful to me. Alright, oh yes, just a little note on the last story. This will not work in every case, but it is something you should definitely try when moving out of a place. If you've kept the house in good stead, and it is always a good idea to keep pictures whenever you can, especially when you first move in. And the landlord then says to you on moving out, I'm keeping your security deposit, it covers such and such damages that either aren't damages or can be put down to reasonable wear and tear. And reasonable wear and tear, if you're wondering, is basically faded, chipped, cracked paint. That's just something that happens over time. Worn or even dirty carpeting, like mentioned in the last story. Maybe scuffed up wooden flooring. It's gonna happen unless you're tiptoeing around in your socks. Fading curtains if the place came furnished. Loose hinges, worn countertops. That's all fairly normal things that happen in every home. And it's up to the landlord to repair that out of their own pocket. It's not down to the tenant. So that can't, or shouldn't rather, be claimed as a reason to keep your security deposit. If they're claiming other damages, at that point, what you should do, and of course, I'm not a lawyer, this isn't legal advice, yada, yada, yada. What you should then do is request, politely but firmly, request the receipts for the repairs and replacements they've had done. And if it's a legitimate complaint, if there's a legitimate reason to use that money in your deposit, they will be able to provide you with that receipt. In many cases, they won't be able to provide you with that information. Doesn't mean they won't still try to argue with you, but it's certainly worth trying. An honest landlord would have no reason to argue with you, and there's many honest ones out there, but sadly many not honest ones as well. Okay, let's move right along to Hellfreezer's question of the day. And today's question is, I'm going to keep this simple, would you like to join the Hellfreezer Discord? There's a link in the description if you'd like to do so. Apologies for not adding it sooner, I wasn't sure if YouTube would let me do that, but I have put it in a bunch of streams, it's fine, so it's in the description now if you want it. And with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.